Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Friday, May 11th, 2018. It's a little chilly out there this morning, so you might want to take a jacket along, but it is going to be 81 degrees and another beautiful day in the neighborhood. So I hope you're getting out there and enjoying it. And this weekend is coming up with Mother's Day, so I hope you get to see your mom and spend some time with her and just be around family and the time that's real special. I just want to share real quick. I know some of you have had some audio trouble in some of the live feeds. If for some reason you do, there is a YouTube video that's always running under Journey Living, and you can always go to my website, journeyliving.org, and catch all of the morning light and the radio shows. So I'm not sure what's going on, but we're going to try to push this through today, so hopefully it'll all go through. So today we're finishing out the great life, and I just want to encourage somebody today who is struggling, who may be feeling like, I don't know this great life. I wish I knew what this great life looked like, but I don't have any idea. So I just wanted to finally close this up today, encouraging all of you that there is a life way beyond anything that we could ever think or imagine. And remember, we started off in Ephesians 3:20 this week, that it says that God will provide and produce this immeasurably more than we could ever think or imagine kind of life if we will just allow him to. So I just want to get into today's teaching, and it says, what does a great life look like? What does it look like to you? Now, from the world standard, we know that would be success, a big house, a car, a status, a position, maybe a title. But in God's economy, it's totally different. And so I want to hit on that today. A lot of times I will quote the verse, John 10:10, where the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. But the second part of that verse is what is so great. And it says that I have come, meaning Jesus, so that you can have life to the full. And in other words, a great life, a life that is overflowing, more than what we could ever think or imagine. Now, we have to remember, how did Christ come to us? And we're going to talk about that toward the end. But there is a process of having this great life, and it's not something that's handed up on a silver platter or silver spoon. Christ went through a lot of angst and suffering to offer this great life to us. And so we have to be willing to know that there's going to be those tests and trials that we've talked about. There's going to be great difficulty, but with great difficulty comes great victory. And that is where we can claim the great life. I also want to read out of the Message Bible, my favorite version of all time, John 10:10 as well. It says, I came so that they can have real and eternal life, more and better life than they had ever dreamed of. So as we know that this life is, fleeting, and every day we are constantly reaching and trying to grab out for whatever is ours. And in a time where the motto is me, myself, and I, take what you can take, what you can get, what you can manipulate, what you can swindle out of people. The society thinks that's the great life, and it is absolutely not. The life that God has died and sent Jesus to die on the cross for us is this life that is so full of happiness and joy and blessings, and with great relationships, something that very few people know of anymore today, because they're so filled with depression and anxiety and stress, and they're searching and grabbing and trying for maybe what somebody else has, and they're worried about maybe how many likes they have on Facebook or followers or Instagram, and we're all searching for this little stuff that we're trying to grasp at. And God says, you know what? I have this really, really great life for you if you will just stop all of that nonsense and come away with me and surrender your life to me for what I have for you. Now, that's a word that most of us don't like to say or hear. It's kind of like the verse for women that says, submit to your husband. That surrender, that submitting is something that our flesh does not want to do. It tends to burn our flesh. And whenever our flesh gets irritated, and a lot of you know what that feels like, it kind of kicks back and says, I don't like this, so I'm going to go a different direction. Well, God says, if you want this life that I have offered for you, you got to do things my way. Yesterday we talked about Abraham, and I just want to touch on him real quick again. You can read about him in Genesis, where he sacrifices, or God asks him to sacrifice his son Isaac, and he takes him to Mount Moriah to an altar, and he's going to ultimately sacrifice him because God has asked him to. But we know that God provided a ram in the thicket, and he had a way of escape of doing that. But the biggest thing with our life and a life full of goodness and greatness is, are you willing to surrender? And then are you willing to trust and obey God? And those are other words that are really tough for us to swallow sometimes. In a day and age where a lot of us don't like to follow the rules, we don't like authority, we don't want anybody telling us what to do, God's economy and God's order is still in such that we are to trust and obey him. We are to trust and obey in our authority, even if they may not be doing the things they're supposed to. God has this order of life that if we will follow it, he will then bless us. And the same was true with Abraham. God gave him a promise, and God may have given you a promise that you think, God, I don't see it anywhere. Well, Abraham was the same. You got to remember, when God gives him this promise, he's about 75 years old. His wife is barren, Sarah, meaning they're past their childbearing years. And God says, I am going to make you a father of nations. Your descendants are going to be more than the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Now, to a man that is impotent, he is no longer able to produce children. His wife is no longer able to produce children. This seems like a far cry from the promise that God says, I will give you. Some of you might be there today. You may feel like God told you something, but your life now looks completely the opposite of whatever it is that you wish for, the hopes and the dreams and this great life that you had wished that could come to pass is completely gone. I have to think that Sarah and Abraham thought the same thing. And 25 years had to pass. You have to read the story and know and study this, that 25 more years came to pass before all of this came to fruition. So I just wanted to share with you somebody that's hanging on to this hope and this dream that God did die and send his son for a great life for us. Is it easy? No, I say that every morning. Is it going to be a walk in the park? No, it's not. But God promises to go with you. And all along the way, there are these wonderful blessings for you if you will just hang on to God. And so Abraham did that. But something we have to remember, and it's a big but in all of this for our life and Abraham's life, Abraham was willing to sacrifice what God had asked him to give up. What is God asking you to give up? What has God asked you to trust him for? What has God said, you know what, give this to me and I will give something back? Maybe you haven't heard that second part, that I will give you something back. Because we have to be willing and know this, that when God asks the same out of us as what he did for us, he sacrificed his best. God may be asking you to lay down your best for him. And that can be scary, friends. I get that, super scary. But if we will trust God and take him at his word, he will multiply, just like he did in Abraham's life. He multiplied by the millions of descendants out of one promise, because he was willing to take Isaac to the mountain and be willing to sacrifice him. But, big but, we have to be willing to do it. We have to be willing to obey. And so many times, that's the word we don't want to do. I know the old song, Trust and Obey, for there's no other way. And we sang that years ago. And it's a great old hymn in churches. Some of you might remember that. But it's a simple little word or passage of words that just trust and obey, because there is no other way. What is God asking you to trust him in? And what has he asked you to do that you need to obey? Could it be that you are not experiencing the great life because you have not been obedient? That's a touchy subject, I know, and it's a really tough one to teach. And a lot of times people don't want to hear about it. And they're like, just let me do my life. I'll do everything my way until things go bad. And then we're like, okay, God, well, I want back in. I want to do it your way. Well, God says, just like to Abraham, Abraham had no idea what that would look like for him when he was trucking his son up to the mountain. All he knew was that God had told him to do this, and he was hoping for that way of escape. He was hoping that he would provide the sacrifice for him, but he really didn't know. And the same is true for us. We may not know what it is that God has in store for us. And while we're laying down, and while we're sacrificing, and while we're surrendering our life to him, that seems like, God, what are you asking of me? Would you be willing to trust him and just obey him and step out when nothing at all looks like it could come to fruition? We know that couple, Sarah and Abraham, had no way of bearing a child just because of their age. I mean, all things turned to no, you're not having kids anymore. Every door was shut for them to produce a child. And God says, you know what? If you'll trust in me, I'll make a way for you. So I just want to end up where we started this week, and it's in Ephesians 3:20. And that God can do immeasurably more than you could ever think or imagine. But you have to be willing to do your part just as God has done his part. Think about this. For some of us that don't understand this concept, think about this, that to know that power that we've talked about all week, and that ascension power that rose Jesus from the grave, there had to be something before that. And how did Christ acquire that power? Well, he had to walk the Calvary road. He had to lay down his life on the cross. There was a tomb. There was a death. There was the Garden of Gethsemane where the Roman soldiers came and arrested him. And when he was in great anguish, he cried out, God, if you will just take this cup from me. Jesus was fully human. He was just like you and I. And he said, I don't want to do this. But God said, if you will, I will provide this way out for all the people, all of my children that I love, which are you and I. And our greatest and ultimate goal is to get to heaven someday and to just live with Christ eternally. Well, we may have to walk that same road, where a world says, go take everything you can. God says, pick up your cross and follow me daily. That's not once, that's daily. That cross that Jesus carried, some say weighed 300 pounds. We carry the weight of the world on us sometimes, and God will often ask us to carry the burdens of others at times. He doesn't expect us to do it alone, but God will go with us, and he doesn't want us carrying unnecessary burdens. But there will be sacrifices, and there will be surrendering, and there will be obedience that we don't possibly want to do. But the ultimate question is, do you want this great life that God talks about? Jesus talks about in John 10:10, and he gives and promises in Ephesians 3:20. Do you want it bad enough? Because if you do, this is a great life to have, but you'll have to do it God's way. It won't be the way the world asks you to do it. So I want you to consider today, do you really want the great life that God has for you? I just want to welcome everybody. Thank you all for messaging me this week. We heard your prayers. We've seen your texts. We're headed to two different directions today. Lima this morning, Columbus this afternoon. We are waiting on our results for the scan, so I'm going to post that or put out a shout out of how those turned out, because I know you're all anxiously awaiting with us as we are. We appreciate your prayers. Continue, we are believing in a miracle from God today. I have great peace going into today. I think Scott does too. We're excited to find out what's going on. Anxious maybe a little bit, but we know that God goes with us. This is just part of the journey, and so many of you are on it as well with us. And so we want to thank you. I just want to thank all the people that continue to pour out their blessings to us. Oh my goodness, we can't hardly contain them right now. And that is the goodness of God. And even in the midst of a crisis of cancer, God is still so good, you guys. So hang in there. We're trying to hang in there. So just have a great Friday. I just love all of you. And this morning light show has been such a blessing. All that you've given to us, we just want to thank you, and we want to praise God for it. So y'all have a great weekend. Thanks for going with us today. We'll let you know real soon. Have a good day. Bye-bye.